as the country and the global community seek an urgent intervention to fight the coronavirus, a viable vaccine seems to be the only short-term hope to beat this pandemic. Johnson & Johnson is among the companies in the forefront of that solution with a vaccine in the works. Now, it's approached the South African authorities for approval. For the latest on the progress made by Johnson & Johnson, I'm joined by our correspondent in New York, William Denselow. So, Will, what's the latest from Johnson & Johnson on its vaccine production in South Africa?
Well, the message we're hearing from Johnson & Johnson is that they've entered a preliminary agreement with Aspen's subsidiary Pharmacare Limited. This facility in South Africa has already seen around $3 billion rand worth of investment. What we understand from Johnson & Johnson we're hearing is that under this agreement, this facility will, under Aspen's oversight, will perform formulation, filing and secondary packaging of the vaccine for supply to Johnson & Johnson. Now, what we're understanding is that this facility will have the capacity to deliver and produce around 300 million doses of a potential Johnson & Johnson vaccine candidate per year. But of course, we're still waiting regulatory approval from Johnson & Johnson, so there's somewhat of a degree of a holding pattern on that front.
Yeah, so any sense of when its vaccine will start hitting arms?
Well, the message from Johnson & Johnson is that it's somewhat of a wait-and-see approach as of now. Of course, they saw somewhat of a setback back in October when someone, a participant in one of their vaccine trials, suffered from an unknown illness at that time. That forced its vaccine trials across the world to be put on pause. That is why it is several weeks behind the likes of Moderna, the likes of Pfizer, BioNTech when it comes to getting vaccine approval, or at least completing its phase 3 vaccine trial. Where we're at when it comes to those trials, according to Johnson & Johnson, is they're hoping to see results when it comes to this phase 3 clinical trial, potentially by the end of this month. The message from Johnson & Johnson is that they'll then, if that goes well as far as they're concerned, they'll then hope to seek emergency use authorization from the FDA here in the United States as early as February, with parallel approval processes to take place around the world as well. Now, the message from Johnson & Johnson with regards to what this means to their facility in South Africa, they say, and I'm quoting here, that it's premature for us to speculate on the actual amount that will be able to be produced at that facility until they receive the results of that phase 3 clinical trial. So very much a wait-and-see holding pattern from Johnson & Johnson until they get a confirmation on those results from that clinical trial.
Yeah, they're giving any details then on where the vaccines will go when it's finally approved?
That's certainly a massive question, one that's still very much ongoing. The message from Johnson & Johnson, they're just saying that at this stage they're just dealing on making sure that this vaccine is first effective. They say they don't essentially want to get too far ahead of themselves. Of course, what we understand in South Africa is that conversations remain ongoing between the likes of Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, AstraZeneca as well. Of course, we understand that South Africa has already received a guarantee for around 10% of its population. It's hoping, of course, to boost that significantly. The target, of course, has been set to 67% of the population by 2021, so around by the end of 2021, so around 40 million or so South Africans. But of course, Johnson & Johnson, as far as they're concerned, their message, they're saying publicly, is that they're very much committed to getting an equitable release of vaccines around the world. They've been joined this vaccine alliance, part of a global coalition and a pledge from drug makers and world bodies to try and get vaccines to not just the wealthiest nations. Johnson & Johnson, for their part, say they're pledging to get 500 million vaccine candidate doses to nations around the world through the end of 2022. However, what that means, though, is that 500 million doses that has been pledged, that will then be divided by to around nearly 200 nations as well. So that is certainly not the amount that nations globally will be hoping for. We also heard from Pfizer, their announcement recently that they're offering or pledging to deliver around 50 million of their vaccine in association with BioNTech to healthcare workers around the continent of Africa. They say that'll start in March and will go through to 2021.
Yeah, so we know in South Africa, our government has been criticized for its approach to the vaccine rollout. But what are public health experts saying about the global vaccine rollout entirely?
Certainly, of course, these conversations remain ongoing, and there's growing concern in South Africa, quite understandably, but around the world as well. Speaking to public health experts here in New York and in New Jersey, where I'm speaking to you here from, where Johnson & Johnson's headquarters are based, there is certainly real concern about what this means, not just for those in South Africa or the UK that are seeing these variants spread. Of course, in New York, just in the recent days, we saw the first case confirmed of the UK variant being found here. What we're hearing from public health experts is that there's real concern that unless people in these nations around the world, especially those that are seeing these new variants to COVID-19, unless they're receiving vaccines, this will have real implications, not just for those residents, but even in nations that are starting to receive these vaccines. Of course, the longer that COVID-19 continues to spread, the longer the risks that it could continue to further mutate. We've also heard recently in the last few days from experts studying the COVID-19 vaccines. There is real concern we're hearing from public health experts when it comes to the vaccines that are already in production, and fears that they could perhaps become less effective when it comes to fighting COVID-19 because of these variants. What we are understanding is that more information will become available in the coming weeks as to just the impact that this new variant is having on these vaccines. But the message, the bottom line we're hearing at the moment from public health experts is that these vaccines already starting to be delivered in the US and across parts of the world will, though, have at least a degree of effectiveness against this new variant.
And then over in the US, big vaccine disruptions. Tell us more about that quickly.
Absolutely. Of course, the Trump administration had pledged 20 million vaccines in arms of Americans by the end of the year. That figure is just a fraction of what was the reality here in New York, just a few miles away from where I'm speaking to you from in New Jersey. The pledge was to really try and ramp up production. The mayor of New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio, he's vowed to or hopes to get as many as 1 million residents vaccinated by the end of the month. To do that, they're installing around 150 pop-up centres by the end of the month to really try and ramp up that production. But there's certainly a huge amount of frustration across the US that while there is vaccine distributed, it's not reaching people's arms.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Live in New Jersey, William Denselow.